Thank you for joining Jacob City Fishing, where the goal is learning to live in the great outdoors found as we walk outside of our homes into nature and society. Hey guys, welcome to Jacob City Fishing for our 4th of July thoughts on 4th of July, I should say. Wanted to touch base a little bit more on the aspects of 4th of July that, originally had taken place with, the Constitution being created, us becoming an independent nation, and ultimately us becoming a United States of America. So with that said, I'm going to start off by reading the first essay by Alexander Hamilton in the Federalist Papers, and then have some discussion about where we're at today in comparison to what his thoughts were in that essay. The Federalist, number 1, Alexander Hamilton, October 27th, 1787, to the people of the state of New York. After an unequivocal experience of the inefficacy of the substituting federal government, you are called upon to deliberate on a new constitution for the United States of America. The subject speaks its own importance, comprehending in its consequences nothing less than the existence of the Union, the safety and welfare of the parts of which it is composed, the fate of an empire, in many respects, the most interesting in the world. It has been frequently remarked that it seems to have been reserved to the people of this country, by their conduct and example, to decide the important question whether societies of men are really capable or not of establishing good government from reflection and choice, or whether they are forever destined to depend for their political constitutions on accident and force. If there be any truth in the remark, the crisis at which we are arrived may with propriety be regarded as the era in which that decision is to be made, and a wrong election of the part we shall act may, in this view, deserve to be considered as the general misfortune of mankind. This idea will add the inducements of philanthropy to those of patriotism, to heighten the solicitude which all considerate and good men must feel for the event. Happy will it be if our choice should be directed by a judicious estimate of our true interests, unperplexed and unbiased by considerations not connected with the public good. But this is a thing more ardently to be wished than seriously to be expected. The plan offered to our deliberations affects too many particular interests, innovates upon too many local institutions, not to involve in its discussion a variety of objects foreign to its merits, and of views, passions, and prejudices little favorable to the discovery of truth. Among the most formidable of the obstacles which the new Constitution will have to encounter may readily be distinguished the obvious interest of a certain class of men in every state to resist all changes which may hazard a diminution of the power, emolument, and consequence of the offices they hold under the state establishments, and the perverted ambition of another class of men who will either hope to aggrandize themselves by the confusions of their country, or will flatter themselves with fairer prospects of elevation from the subdivision of the empire into several partial confederacies, than from its union under one government. It is not, however, my design to dwell upon observations of this nature. I am well aware that it would be disingenuous to resolve indiscriminately the opposition of any set of men, merely because their situation might subject them to suspicion, and to interested or ambitious views. Candor will oblige us to admit that even such men may be actuated by upright intentions, and it cannot be doubted that much of the opposition which has made its appearance, or may hereafter make its appearance, will spring from sources, blameless at least, if not respectable, the honest errors of minds led astray by preconceived jealousies and fears. So numerous, indeed, and so powerful are the causes which serve to give a false bias to the judgment, that we upon many occasions see wise and good men on the wrong as well as on the right side of questions of the first magnitude to society. This circumstance, if duly attended to, would furnish a lesson of moderation to those who are ever so much persuaded of their being in the right in any controversy. And further reason for caution in this respect might be drawn from the reflection that we are not always sure that those who advocate the truth are influenced by purer principles than their antagonists. Ambition, avarice, personal animosity, party opposition, and many other motives not more laudable than these are apt to operate as well upon those who operate as upon those who oppose the right side of a question. Were there not even these inducements to moderation, nothing could be more ill-judged than that intolerant spirit which has at all times characterized political parties. For in politics, as in religion, it is equally absurd to aim at making proselytes by fire and sword. Heresies in either can rarely be cured by persecution. And yet, however, just these sentiments will be allowed to be. We have already sufficient indications that it will happen in this, as in all former cases of great national discussion. A torrent of angry and malignant passions will be let loose. To judge from the conduct of the opposite parties, we shall be led to conclude that they will mutually hope to evince the justness of their opinions and to increase the number of their converts by the loudness of their declamations and by the bitterness of their invectives. An enlightened zeal for the energy and efficiency of government will be stigmatized as the offspring of a temper fond of despotic power and hostile to the principles of liberty. An over-scrupulous jealousy of danger to the rights of the people, which is more commonly the fault of the head than of the heart, will be represented as mere pretense and artifice, the bait for popularity at the expense of public good. It will be forgotten, on the one hand, that jealousy is the usual concomitant of violent love, and that the noble enthusiasm of liberty is too apt to be infected with a spirit of narrow and illiberal distrust. On the other hand, it will be equally forgotten that the vigor of government is essential to the security of liberty, that in the contemplation of a sound and well-informed judgment, their interests can never be separated, and that a dangerous ambition more often lurks behind the specious mask of zeal for the rights of the people than under the forbidding appearance of zeal for the firmness and efficiency of government. History will teach us that the former has been found a much more certain road to the introduction of despotism than the latter, and that of those men who have overturned the liberties and republics, of the greatest number have begun their career by paying the obsequious court to the people, commencing demagogues and ending tyrants. In the course of the preceding observations, I have had an eye, my fellow citizens, to putting you upon your guard against all attempts, from whatever quarter, to influence your decision in a matter of the utmost moment to your welfare by any impressions other than those which may result from the evidence of truth. You will, no doubt, at the same time, have collected from the general scope of them that they proceed from a source not unfriendly to the new Constitution. Yes, my countrymen, I own to you that after having given it an attentive consideration, I am clearly of opinion it is your interest to adopt it. I am convinced that this is the safest course for your liberty, your dignity, and your happiness. I affect not reserves which I do not feel. I will not amuse you with an appearance of deliberation when I have decided. I frankly acknowledge to you my convictions, and I will freely lay before you the reasons on which they are founded. The consciousness of good intentions disdains ambiguity. I shall not, however, multiply professions on this head. My motives must remain in the depository of my own breast. My arguments will be open to all and may be judged of by all. They shall at least be offered in a spirit which will not disgrace the cause of truth. I propose in a series of papers to discuss the following interesting particulars: the utility of the Union to your political prosperity, the insufficiency of the present Confederation to preserve the Union, the necessity of a government at least equally energetic with the one proposed to the attainment of this object, the conformity of the proposed Constitution to the true principles of republican government, its analogy to your own state constitution, and lastly, the additional security which its adoption will afford to the preservation of the species of government, to liberty, and to property. In the progress of this discussion, I shall endeavor to give a satisfactory answer to all the objections which have made their appearance that may seem to have any claim to your attention, and may perhaps be thought superfluous to offer arguments to prove the utility of the Union, a point no doubt deeply engraved on the hearts of the great body of the people in every state, and one which it may be imagined has no adversaries. But the fact is that we already hear it whispered in private circles of those who oppose the new Constitution, that the 13 states are too great extent for any general system, and that we must, of necessity, resort to separate confederacies of distinct portions of the whole. This doctrine will, in all probability, be gradually propagated till it has votaries enough to countenance an open avowal of it. For nothing can be more evident to those who are able to take an enlarged view of the subject than the alternative of an adoption of the new Constitution or a dismemberment of the Union. It will therefore be of use to begin by examining the advantages of the Union, the certain evils, and the probable dangers to which every state will be exposed from its dissolution. This shall accordingly constitute the subject of my next address. Publius. All right, guys, as you heard, you can hear very similar situations going on back then with this first writing, particularly centered around the issue of the Constitution. Should we have it? What should it say? And today is more like how should it be interpreted and how can we change it? Whether or not the country should be united or not. In their case, it was all about the Confederacy and wanting to break apart into 3-4 groups of states versus being in United States. And then also, how does the church play? He doesn't say this, but I'm going to talk about how does the church play in this. We see such similar situations going on within Hamilton's time frame, and it obviously is only a short period of time after the country was independent. When Hamilton wrote this and the Constitution was coming, starting out, 1787, only 11 years after, 1776. And so, as I said, what we have is a real desire by Hamilton and others to propose the reasons why the Constitution was necessary and why to have a unionized government over multiple confederacies. And he recognizes as he begins his process of argument, and as well as those that are with him, that there are going to be those that utilize the confusion of the times in order to get what they want. So he states that the perverted ambition of another class of men who will either hope to aggrandize themselves by the confusions of their country or will flatter themselves with fairer prospects of elevation from the subdivision of the empire into several partial confederacies than from its union under one government. Now, both of those things in some ways are happening today. The first, the utilization of confusion. The media, the left, utilizes the confusion of the country, the ignorance of the country about economics, about politics in general, about foreign affairs, about so many different things, social justice, constitutional or criminal justice, how to utilize stats, just probability and statistics, just utilizing the confusion in order to get what they want. They get more money, they get more power, self-aggrandizement, they grow in popularity because they propose new things that really have no logical support whatsoever. And that was happening then. And if it's happening then, when the country wasn't even unionized yet, as a whole under the Constitution, then even more so today, we really need to think through whether we are educated Americans. Now, from a Christian point of view, it even goes further than that, that as Christians, we understand that being a foreigner and visitor in this place only enables us to participate to a certain extent. So we go as far as we possibly can in the country that we were born in or that we live in. And we recognize that at the end of the day, Christ is our King, and there's going to be limitations based off of our Christian viewpoints as we interact with people in the country that we live in. And this is especially true with the second part of this, where back then there were opponents to utilizing or submitting under the rule of law of a constitution that wanted to break the country up into smaller parts. And we kind of, in some senses, have that today with the left, having and pushing for hegemony, intersectionality, critical theory, and these things to create these people groups that oppose each other, that one is greater than the other because they have various minority groups that, if you're part of more minority groups, you're in the higher level of persecution and oppression, and you need to have more power. equalize you with everybody else, particularly the white male, i.e., the person that's talking right now. But as Christians, we also see that's not right. We also see that a singular government is important. We're not looking here and now on this earth, though some are, as professing Christians, to create a theocracy on earth. The kingdom's already here. And Jesus is coming as our King and Lord. He is our King and Lord. We're not going to be placing a King and Lord here on earth. And so we look to the times and try to live a just life based off of Scripture. Now, the church has done an awful job of this historically. And, we look as a church, it has looked to synchronize with the world. And so what it's done is it's tried to move into the seeker sensitive movements, to get people involved emotionally, to kind of use what the world has to offer to change what's in the church, instead of using what God has done to change the world and create Christ-like ones in the world that are changing the world. It's like in Judges. My wife and I were reading Judges together, and what was going on is that Israel had conquered the land, and there had been some non-conquered areas, and they wanted to assimilate into those areas, and they did so, and then began worshiping their false gods. And over again, that assimilation led to idolatry. And over again, God brought them to judgment and then had them be conquered. And we see this today. The church over and over again assimilates itself into the culture, and then the culture ends up dominating over the church. We saw it with the creation versus science supposed debate, even though, believing in creation, that God created everything in 6 days and rested on the seventh, is not illegitimate, not a gap theory, not evolution in Scripture, but what it actually says in the text doesn't dissuade believers from utilizing science to support their arguments, all the way to the social justice movement now and critical theory. And so we have to, as believers, as Christians, step out and actually influence the world, not let it influence us. Now, with that said, Hamilton also discusses several other issues, particularly around those that are in opposition to submitting to the Constitution, that there's going to be these individuals where they have good motives, but are on the wrong side of the answer for whatever question it is. So somebody on the Roe v. Wade, on the abortion topic, they may have a good motive and desire to help women, supposedly, with their decision. But in reality, the outcome, the decision that they're trying to support is wrong, outright wrong. Now, on the flip side, there are those that have the right decision that abortion should be illegal and wrong. It is wrong, that they have the wrong motives for it. And so they, instead of having a good, gracious reason or in reasoning for what they believe, they are forceful and angry and arrogant about how they respond, and their motives are wrong. They just want to be right. Now, they're on the right side of the answer, but they have the wrong motives. And Hamilton really does bring up that there are those like that, and he doesn't want to address them unfairly. He does state that it would be disingenuous to resolve indiscriminately the opposition of any set of men. So he desires to address the topics, understanding that particular people may have good motives for why they're at where they're at, but they're just ignorant and illogical with their reasoning. And with that said, he also understands that there's this further issue, that because of the confusion going on in the world, and especially the way the left today, let alone back then, uses the confusion and ignorance of Americans to get what they want, not to do what is right. And that there's a lot of illogical arguments on their side for what they support. The same thing is in parallel going on, where there's this passion by those that are opposing the right thing. So back then it was the opposition of submitting to the Constitution. They have a passion and a zeal for supposedly addressing the rights of the people, but they're illogical. But their passion is so fervent that it actually encourages people to join them. So passion and emotion equate to outcome in converts. Whereas those that were logical and understood that they wanted efficient government over them that would benefit the rights and property of the people of America, they weren't zealous. And people were confusing the stoicism with a lack of fervency for what they believed in. And there was a problem then with it. And as there is today, both in the church for the church and out of the church for America, there is a problem on the conservative side of being passionate, demonstrating passion for what they believe. There's a stoicism there, a logical nature to them. But because there isn't a passion, the people think that they're wrong. Well, they're not so passionate about what they think, so we're not going to align with them. But there's no logic or knowledge of particular situations that actually help an individual then move out of that emotional state into a realization like, hey, it's not that they're not passionate. They just show their passion differently by their efforts to do the right things. And so it really is interesting that back then, the desire to break the union apart, or not even create a union, I should say, not have a singular federal government that abided by the rule of law, was really absent. Again, these people were passionate at first, as he says, there were these whispers, these behind closed doors, these people were having these conversations, but at some point it's going to come out, and it did, and then we get the Civil War. And there were so many different things going on at the time, but the priority was keeping the union of the church, or not the church, of the United States, or this of America. And the church just has not done a good job either of recognizing its place and role within it. And there's so much confusion there because of that. And it's really sad to see what has been happening over time historically as the church tries to assimilate into the world and gets completely obliterated and represents God falsely. And then that false representation becomes a burden for the true church to bear when addressing issues. And there's just this constant lack of there's constant ignorance and a lack of willingness to try to learn where each other stands, in patience and graciousness, the true meaning of tolerance. In certain regards, that it's just not going on. And so I know it sounds like a lot for the 4th of July. I know it sounds like more like a disappointment, and it really is. It's a mourning. We see in scripture that there were prophets that mourned over the state of Israel because of their rebellion to God. And, America is not a theocracy, so I don't necessarily mourn for it in that way, but I do mourn for the church in that way, that its constant adulterous rebellion is really disappointing. It's really sad. It grieves me. And with that, its lack of influence on the United States as a whole through the century, since 1776, has really brought us to such a bad place. And not all of it was bad, but the parts that were bad have left us where we're at today. And no matter what, the cross is going to be an offense to unbelievers, to those that are at odds with God in the first place. But my desire is for you to really begin to question, where are we really at? Is it a time of celebration? We can spend the time with our families and enjoy those moments, but can we take a step back and be honest with ourselves about the state of the country, where we're at and where the country's headed, and do what's necessary to make the changes, to not be apathetic, to be passionate, to step up into political roles and to lead and to make change, to push our churches to preach truth and talk about the political issues honestly and biblically, and to not be synced up with the way the world handles everything. So with that said, happy 4th of July again. I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. And yeah, I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful week. Thank you for taking a moment to consider what God has to say during your adventure outdoors. Please click the subscribe button below along with the notifications button on the YouTube channel so you learn how to survive and thrive in these great outdoors.